Let me just fix this. That's better. Okay, music. Do the thing again. Hello all, Sima Dave, the canned historian, here to bring you another one of my patented copyright-protected canned histories, so don't steal them! Ever have a party go terribly awry? Maybe you ran out of appetizers, or the power goes out, or some crazy protesters burst in and dump all of your beverages into the local harbor. That's every other Tuesday for me. Well, this is how a party on December 16, 1773 went down on the decks of 3 ships owned by the East India Company. This so-called Boston Tea Party has over time become one of the defining moments of the revolt against British rule in the American colonies and the celebration of property destruction and all its glory. So good job, Massachusetts. Yes, that's how you spell it. A common misperception about this event is that the perpetrators, a group known as the Sons of Liberty, acted because they didn't want to pay extra for their tea. Yes, taxes became a point of contention in the colonies following the 7 Years' War, also called the French and Indian War for you 5-year-olds out there. Britain paid dearly for their colony's defense against those Franco-frogs, and believed that their American settlers should take responsibility for a portion of this cost. So between 1764 and 65, the British Parliament passed various laws that enacted some direct taxes on goods, such as the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and, most vexing of all, the Funny Hat Act.
Oh, but where am I to buy my outlandish hats at affordable prices?
Keep in mind that the Americans weren't complaining about the cost of these taxes. They were relatively low compared to what the actual British were paying at the time, explaining why they could never afford to go to the dentist. But what really ground the Americans' gears was the fact that Parliament passed these acts without asking them. The colonies did not have any representation in Parliament, and as such believed that any taxation passed in such a legislature could not apply to them. There's probably a catchier way to say that, but my mind's drawing a blank right now. Massive protests and boycotts by Americans, especially those sons of liberty, created enough backlash to have the acts repealed in 1766. The Brits tried again with taxes the next year with the Townshend Acts, which taxed paint, glass, and broken guitars. But the Americans wouldn't be fooled again, and they were repealed in 1770. Thinking the third time was the charm, Parliament passed the Tea Act in 1773. This tax was a little bit different. Due to some kind of market trickery that contemporary economist Adam Smith called whackonomics, the Tea Act actually lowered the price of tea in the Americas by cutting out middlemen and making it cheaper than illegal smuggled tea. So why would the colonists complain? 'Cause it's the principle of the thing, darn it. Who was Parliament to tax them when there wasn't one single person elected from America to voice their dissent? What did they call that again? I seriously can't think of it. So a boycott of British tea was promoted throughout the colonies. Dutch smugglers operated in full in New York and Philadelphia, and some even imported Tisane from Labrador in present-day Canada, despite its reputation as the diet right of teas. Ugh. Also significant were protests to prevent ships carrying the taxed tea from landing in colonial harbors. A little-known event that occurred 2 months before the Boston Tea Party was the Philadelphia Tea Party, where townspeople forced a ship's captain to head back to England with the tea still on board, presumably by dressing him up as Santa Claus and throwing snowballs at him. Up in Boston, Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson refused to be intimidated and made sure the tea-carrying vessels docked safely in the harbor. Local Sons of Liberty leader and summer ale maker, Samuel Adams, called a meeting on December 16, 1773 to discuss how to best troll the government some more. Sources differ as to what happened next. The traditional account states that when the meeting went for hours and hours without any resolution, which sounds like every meeting ever, Samuel Adams said, "This meeting can do nothing further to save the country." This allegedly was his pre-arranged signal to go do something crazy. Other first-hand accounts say differently, claiming that the meeting started to get out of hand, and Adams even tried preventing people from leaving, with excuses like, "Wait up guys, we haven't even gone over the minutes from our last pointless meeting yet." Another issue up for debate was what the perpetrators were wearing for the Boston Tea Party. "No, Joan Rivers, you bad, go away." Anyhow, Many depictions of the event have them wearing elaborate Native American outfits with humongous headdresses. These are probably exaggerations, as it would have taken all day in an arts and crafts workshop to construct that accessory. But some primary sources claim that a quick wardrobe switch did occur before the party, with some changing into ragged clothing, putting soot on their faces, and painting with all the colors of the wind. But why? Obviously the Tea Partiers wanted to keep their identities hidden, but why did they choose the Native American, or specifically Mohawk, disguise? Historians have argued that this particular outfit was chosen beforehand as a symbolic message to the British, that the colonists now identify themselves more as Americans than Europeans. Maybe the Washington Redskins can try that angle. Probably not. Regardless of these details, this fact remains. That evening, a group numbering over 100 boarded 3 vessels docked in Boston Harbor, and in the course of 3 hours, dumped 342 chests of tea overboard. Even if Samuel Adams wasn't initially on board, with the Tea Party, he soon did all he could to promote it as a legitimate protest against Parliament's ability to tax without a representative from the colonies. That almost sounded like a thing. Britain, understandably, wasn't too happy with the conduct of its citizens, or with the loss of what's the equivalent of over $1 million worth of goods. In response, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, otherwise known as the Intolerable Acts, or the Mommy, I Don't Want It Acts. In it, they closed Boston Harbor until the British were compensated for the tea, limited the ability for colonists to hold meetings, allowed for the quartering of British soldiers in colonist homes, and even included a Nelson Muntz sticker on the colonial copy of the act. They hoped that by making an example of Massachusetts, the other 12 colonies would fall back in line. Obviously, they don't know America too well. Instead, a calling of the First Continental Congress created one of the earliest scenes of unity among the colonies, with everyone getting together to share their own derogatory name for a British soldier. You call them lobsterbacks? That's hilarious. The Congress succeeded in implementing a 13-colony-wide boycott on British goods, and trade with the Americas went down 97% from the previous year. They also tried tattling on Parliament to King George III, saying that all those taxes and punishments for their behavior made their insides feel all icky. But before any of their complaints made it to British ears, the shot heard round the world was fired just outside of Boston. No, not Bucky Dent's home run, or Bobby Orr's Stanley Cup winning goal, or every Larry Bird clutch three-pointer. God, you Boston sports fans are crazy. The battles of Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775 opened up full military conflict between the British and the colonists. This allowed Parliament to respond to any American complaint with "La la la, we're not listening," while they were in revolt. Of course, everyone knows what happens next. All the colonies came together. Washington kicked butt in every battle. We didn't need anybody's help. And finally, we were free to write our own patriotic songs. But the event that really sparked the Revolution and the War for Independence was the Boston Tea Party. Without it, the Brits and the Pats might have been at this power struggle about taxation and representation for several more years. That makes a good rhyme. They should have made that into a catchphrase. The Tea Party was a crazy enough of an act that it garnered a ton of attention. Most importantly, it annoyed the British enough that their exaggerated response convinced Americans that dealing with Parliament was no longer worth their time.
Ain't nobody got time for that!
Interestingly enough, this event was initially ignored in American history, with citizens of the newfound nation embarrassed about this example of wanton property destruction as a key moment in the Revolution. Eventually they sucked it up and realized how awesome and American it was, giving it its ironically civil name in the mid-1800s and celebrating it through reenactments, exhibits, postage stamps, and spelling-challenged political movements. The only thing that would have made it cooler is if they blew up the tea, with fireworks, especially the kind that makes sparkles at the end. Purdy. Thanks for watching this video from the Canned Historian. If you haven't already, check out my previous video on the Battle of Thermopylae. Or if you need more early American action, read up on my histories of George Washington and that scam artist Betsy Ross by clicking their pretty faces below. I've got plenty of other histories to satisfy your insatiable desire for all things me, so definitely check out my blog if you have the time, which I'm sure you do. Remember, those who don't study history are doomed. Period.